The Battle of Waterloo was fought on Sunday, the 18th of June 1815, near Waterloo in present-day Belgium, then part of the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. A French army under the command of Napoleon Bonaparte was defeated by two of the armies of the Seventh Coalition, an Anglo-led Allied army under the command of the Duke of Wellington, and a Prussian army under the command of Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, Prince of Wahlstatt. The battle resulted in the end of Bonaparte's reign and of the First French Empire, and set a chronological milestone between serial European wars and decades of relative peace. Upon Napoleon's return to power in March 1815, many states that had opposed him formed the Seventh Coalition and began to mobilize armies. Wellington and Blücher's armies were cantoned close to the northeastern border of France. Napoleon chose to attack them in the hope of destroying them before they could join in a coordinated invasion of France with other members of the coalition. Waterloo was the decisive engagement of the Waterloo campaign and Napoleon's last. According to Wellington, the battle was the nearest run thing you ever saw in your life. The defeat at Waterloo ended Napoleon's rule as Emperor of the French, and marked the end of his 100 days' return from exile. Napoleon abdicated 4 days later, and on the 7th of July coalition forces entered Paris. After the Battle of Quatre Bras, Wellington withdrew from Quatre Bras to Waterloo. After the simultaneous Battle of Leine, the Prussians withdrew parallel to Wellington, drawing a third part of Napoleon's forces away from Waterloo to the separate and simultaneous Battle of Waver. Upon learning that the Prussian army was able to support him, Wellington decided to offer battle on the Mont Saint-Jean escarpment, across the Brussels road. Here he withstood repeated attacks by the French throughout the afternoon, aided by the progressively arriving Prussians. In the evening, Napoleon committed his last reserves to a desperate final attack, which was narrowly beaten back, with the Prussians breaking through on the French right flank. Wellington's Anglo-Allied army counterattacked in the center, and the French army was routed. The battlefield is located in the municipalities of Braine-l'Alleud and Larne, about 15 kilometers south of Brussels, and about 2 kilometers from the town of Waterloo. The site of the battlefield today is dominated by a large monument, the Lion's Mound, as this mound was constructed from earth taken from the battlefield itself. The contemporary topography of the battlefield near the mound has not been preserved. Prelude. On the 13th of March 1815, 6 days before Napoleon reached Paris, the powers at the Congress of Vienna declared him an outlaw. 4 days later, the United Kingdom, Russia, Austria, and Prussia mobilized armies to defeat Napoleon. Critically outnumbered, Napoleon knew that once his attempts at dissuading one or more of the Seventh Coalition allies from invading France had failed. His only chance of remaining in power was to attack before the coalition mobilized. Had Napoleon succeeded in destroying the existing coalition forces south of Brussels before they were reinforced, he might have been able to drive the British back to the sea, knock the Prussians out of the war, and then turn his armies towards the Austrians and Russians. An additional consideration was that there were many French-speaking sympathizers in Belgium, and a French victory might trigger a friendly revolution there. Also, the British troops in Belgium were largely second-line troops. Most of the veterans of the Peninsular War had been sent to North America to fight in the War of 1812. Wellington's initial dispositions were intended to counter the threat of Napoleon enveloping the coalition armies by moving through Mons to the southwest of Brussels. This would have cut Wellington's communications with his base at Ostend, but would have pushed his army closer to Blücher's. Napoleon manipulated Wellington's fear of this loss of his supply chain from the Channel ports with false intelligence. By June, Napoleon had raised a total army strength of about 300,000 men. The force at his disposal at Waterloo was less than one-third that size, but they were nearly all loyal and experienced soldiers. He divided his army into a left wing commanded by Marshal Ney, a right wing commanded by Marshal Grouchy, and a reserve under his command. Crossing the frontier near Charleroi before dawn on the 15th of June, the French rapidly overran coalition outposts, securing Napoleon's central position between Wellington's and Blücher's armies. Only very late on the night of the 15th of June was Wellington certain that the Charleroi attack was the main French thrust. In the early hours of the 16th of June, at the Duchesses of Richmond's ball in Brussels, he received a dispatch from the Prince of Orange and was shocked by the speed of Napoleon's advance. He hastily ordered his army to concentrate on Quatre Bras, where the Prince of Orange, with the brigade of Prince Bernhard of Saxe-Weimar, was holding a tenuous position against the soldiers of Ney's left wing. Ney's orders were to secure the crossroads of Quatre Bras, so that, if necessary, he could later swing east and reinforce Napoleon. Napoleon moved against the concentrated Prussian army first. On the 16th of June, with a part of the reserve and the right wing of the army, he attacked and defeated Blücher's Prussians at the Battle of Waterloo. The Prussian centre gave way under more heavy French assaults, but the flanks held their ground. Ney, meanwhile, found the crossroads of Quatre Bras lightly held by the Prince of Orange, who repelled Ney's initial attacks but was gradually driven back by overwhelming numbers of French troops. First reinforcements and then Wellington arrived. He took command and drove Ney back, securing the crossroads by early evening, too late to send help to the Prussians, who were defeated at the Battle of Waterloo on the same day. The Prussian defeat made Wellington's position at Quatre Bras untenable, so the next day he withdrew northwards, to a defensive position he had reconnoitred the previous year, the low ridge of Mont Saint-Anne, south of the village of Waterloo and the Sonian forest. The Prussian retreat from Waterloo went uninterrupted and seemingly unnoticed by the French. The bulk of the rearguard units held their positions until about midnight, and some elements did not move out until the following morning, ignored by the French. Crucially, the Prussians did not retreat to the east along their own lines of communication. Instead, they too fell back northwards, parallel to Wellington's line of march, still within supporting distance and in communication with him throughout. The Prussians rallied on Bülow's 4th Corps, which had not been engaged at Ligny and was in a strong position south of Wavre. Once he had intelligence of the Prussian defeat, Wellington organized a retreat from Quatre Bras to Waterloo. Napoleon, with the reserves, made a late start on the 17th of June and joined Ney at Quatre Bras at 1300 to attack Wellington's army, but found the position empty. The French pursued Wellington's retreating army all the way to Waterloo. However, due to weather and the head start that Napoleon's tardy advance had allowed Wellington, apart from a cavalry action at Genappe, there was no other substantial engagement. Before leaving Ligny, Napoleon ordered Grouchy, commander of the right wing, to follow up the retreating Prussians with 33,000 men. A late start, uncertainty about the direction the Prussians had taken, and the vagueness of the orders given to him meant that Grouchy was too late to prevent the Prussian army reaching Wavre, from where it could march to support Wellington. By the end of the 17th of June, Wellington's army had arrived at its position at Waterloo, with the main body of Napoleon's army following. Blücher's army was gathering in and around Wavre, around 8 miles to the east of the city. Armies Three armies were involved in the battle: Napoleon's Armée Occulte du Nord, a multinational army under Wellington, and a Prussian army under Blücher. The French army of around 69,000 consisted of 48,000 infantry, 14,000 cavalry, and 7,000 artillery with 250 guns. Napoleon had used conscription to fill the ranks of the French army throughout his rule, but he did not conscript men for the 1815 campaign. His troops were mainly veterans with considerable experience and a fierce devotion to their emperor. The cavalry in particular was both numerous and formidable, and included 14 regiments of armored heavy cavalry and 7 of highly versatile lancers. Wellington claimed that he himself had an infamous army, very weak and ill-equipped, and a very inexperienced staff. His troops consisted of 67,000 men, 50,000 infantry, 11,000 cavalry, and 6,000 artillery with 150 guns. Of these, 25,000 were British, with another 6,000 from the King's German Legion. All of the British Army troops were regular soldiers, but only 7,000 of them were Peninsular War veterans. In addition, there were 17,000 Dutch and Belgian troops, 11,000 from Hanover, 6,000 from Brunswick, and 3,000 from Nassau. Many of the troops in the coalition armies were inexperienced. The Dutch army had been re-established in 1815, following the earlier defeat of Napoleon, with the exception of the British and some from Hanover and Brunswick who had fought with the British Army in Spain. Many of the professional soldiers in the coalition armies had spent some of the time in the French army or in armies allied to the Napoleonic regime. The historian Barbaro states that in this heterogeneous army the difference between British and foreign troops did not prove significant under fire. Wellington was also acutely short of heavy cavalry, having only 7 British and 3 Dutch regiments. The Duke of York composed many of his staff officers on Wellington, including his second-in-command, the Earl of Uxbridge. Uxbridge commanded the cavalry and had carte blanche from Wellington to commit these forces at his discretion. Wellington stationed a further 17,000 troops at Halle, 8 miles away to the west. They were not recalled to participate in the battle but were to serve as a fallback position should the battle be lost. They were mostly composed of Dutch troops under Prince of Orange's younger brother Prince Frederick of the Netherlands. They were placed as a guard against any possible wide flanking movement by the French forces, and also to act as a rearguard if Wellington was forced to retreat towards Antwerp and the coast. The Prussian army was in the throes of reorganization. In 1815, the former reserve regiments, legions, and Freikorps volunteer formations from the wars of 1813 to 1814 were in the process of being absorbed into the line, along with many Landwehr regiments. The Landwehr were mostly untrained and unequipped when they arrived in Belgium. The Prussian cavalry were in a similar state. Its artillery was also reorganizing and did not give its best performance. Guns and equipment continued to arrive during and after the battle. Offsetting these handicaps, the Prussian army had excellent and professional leadership in its general staff organization. These officers came from 4 schools developed for this purpose and thus worked to a common standard of training. This system was in marked contrast to the conflicting, vague orders issued by the French army. This staff system ensured that before Ligny, 3/4 of the Prussian army concentrated for battle at 24 hours' notice. After Ligny, the Prussian army, although defeated, was able to realign its supply train, reorganize itself, and intervene decisively on the Waterloo battlefield within 48 hours. 2.5 Prussian army corps, or 48,000 men, were engaged engaged at Waterloo. 2 brigades under Bülow, commander of 4th Corps, attacked Low by 1630, while Ziethen's 1st Corps and parts of Pich's 1st 2nd Corps engaged at about 1800. Battlefield. The Waterloo position was a strong one. It consisted of a long ridge running east-west, perpendicular to and bisected by the main road to Brussels. Along the crest of the ridge ran the Ohain Road, a deep sunken lane. Near the crossroads with the Brussels Road was a large elm tree that was roughly in the center of Wellington's position and served as his command post for much of the day. Wellington deployed his infantry in a line just behind the crest of the ridge following the Ohain Road, using the reverse slope, as he had many times previously. Wellington concealed his strength from the French, with the exception of his skirmishers and artillery. The length of front of the battlefield was also relatively short at 2.5 miles. This allowed Wellington to draw up his forces in depth, which he did in the center and on the right, all the way towards the village of Braine-l'Alleud, in the expectation that the Prussians would reinforce his left during the day. In front of the ridge, there were 3 positions that could be fortified. On the extreme right were the chateau, garden, and orchard of Hougoumont. This was a large and well-built country house, initially hidden in trees. The house faced north along a sunken, covered lane along which it could be supplied. On the extreme left was the hamlet of Papelotte. Both Hougoumont and Papelotte were fortified and garrisoned, and thus anchored Wellington's flanks securely. Papelotte also commanded the road to Wavre that the Prussians would use to send reinforcements to Wellington's position. On the western side of the main road, and in front of the rest of Wellington's line, was the farmhouse and orchard of Le Haye-Saint, which was garrisoned with 400 light infantry of the King's German Legion. On the opposite side of the road was a disused sand quarry, where the 95th Rifles were posted as sharpshooters. Wellington's forces' positioning presented a formidable challenge to any attacking force. Any attempt to turn Wellington's right would entail taking the entrenched Hougoumont position. Any attack on his right center would mean the attackers would have to march between enfilading fire from Hougoumont and La Haye-Saint. On the left, any attack would also be enfiladed by fire from La Haye-Saint and its adjoining sand pen, and any attempt at turning the left flank would entail fighting through the lanes and hedgerows surrounding Papelotte and the other garrisoned buildings on that flank, and some very wet ground in the Smohain defile. The French army formed on the slopes of another ridge to the south. Napoleon could not see Wellington's positions, so he drew his forces up symmetrically about the Brussels road. On the right was 1st Corps under Delaune with 16,000 infantry and 1,500 cavalry, plus a cavalry reserve of 4,700. On the left was 2nd Corps under Ray with 13,000 infantry and 1,300 cavalry, and a cavalry reserve of 4,600. In the center, about the road south of the Inn-Labelle alliance, were a reserve including Lobo's 6th Corps with 6,000 men, the 13,000 infantry of the Imperial Guard, and a cavalry reserve of 2,000. In the right rear of the French position was the substantial village of Planchenois, and at the extreme right, the Bois de Paris wood. Napoleon initially commanded the battle from Ross-en-Farm, where he could see the entire battlefield, but moved to a position near La Belle Alliance early in the afternoon. Command on the battlefield was delegated to Ney.